No one's going to seek you out and pat you on the back. Everyone's so busy. So you have to be a little political here in terms of, what your normal cadence would have been maybe in government, where in the corporate market, it's like, hey, when I get a win, I need to share the win and share the cost savings and make myself more visible. Why do you have to do that? It's because everybody is fighting for budget. They're fighting for their programs, and you need money to hire the best people.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the LifeRaft Security Conversation series. I'm your host, Robert Value, and today I'm joined by the chairman and co-founder of Topo.ai, Phil Harris. Our conversation today focuses on how security leaders can better articulate the value of their programs. Security, after all, is about trying to make nothing happen. So it can be tough to justify to decision makers why investing in physical security measures is worthwhile to their business. So we'll explore how managers can better present the value of their programs when talking to executives. But before we jump in, a little bit about Phil. Like I said, he's the co-founder of Topo.ai. Their technology helps security leaders visualize the threat landscape and respond to incidences more effectively. For the past decade, Phil has been on the forefront of using social media to gather threat intel. Phil, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Robert. It's a real pleasure to be on this podcast.
I was really excited to have the opportunity to talk with you, especially about this topic, because I've been a manager myself of different departments, and I've been in the position of asking for more budget, looking to hire more people or invest in new software. And sometimes you get that pushback from leaders, but you've sat on the other side of the desk in a lot of these conversations. So really excited just to have the chance to pick your brain over this topic and kind of get a masterclass in this.
Great. Looking forward to it.
In terms of discussing like return on investment for a lot of these programs, I was on the Topo blog a number of times, and this has come up quite a bit. And it was something that you really wanted to talk about here. Why do you feel like this conversation is so important?
Well, first of all, the corporate environment is very different from where most of our security leaders come from, which is the government side. The way corporations function and the way a leader gets a higher level of prominence, gets more budget, gets more authority, is just the pathway is just different. And I think it's important to discuss, what is success in a corporate environment versus perhaps law enforcement or some other intelligence function within the government. So the leaders in corporate America, the most powerful leaders in corporate America, just corporations in general in Canada, across the world, have profit and loss responsibility. These are what are called the line managers. In the corporate security world, that is a staff and support function that is meant to service other areas of the corporation. So while our customers while corporate security leaders have this responsibility to keep people safe and keep assets safe, their ultimate customer that governs their budget, governs their bonus, governs their success or failure, and measures them are really the individuals that own the profit and loss, and ultimately the CEO of the company. But many of our leaders have many different divisions within their corporation. There's many different profit and loss leaders that they could be accountable to. So I guess the first point is just recognizing the environment that you're in is distinctly different. Success and failure are measured differently. It isn't just looking back in the year past and saying, well, no one lost their life, on the job at our company. It's more than that. And there is an old adage too within corporate America, which is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So corporations on the world are data intensive, and we typically in management reviews, expectations are set on what I'm going to do. And then there's a feedback loop on what I've done. And then with that success or failure comes, more budget or less budget. So I guess the corporate market is just very different than the government market. So the first point is, how do we collectively recognize that it's different? And then how do we define success? And that's a separate point here that we can delve into, which is every corporation has a different set of factors and perceives risks in different ways. Sometimes, unfortunately, it starts with an event that happens within a corporation. there's a theft, maybe there's workplace violence, maybe there's some other critical event that causes the corporation to focus on it. And then these groups get spun up. And then the mission is to try to mitigate that specific issue in the future, which, is a genesis for the program in general. But what we found is that the most successful corporate security groups and risk mitigation teams not only address those critical components of those critical events that have happened in the past, but also protect the employees, protect assets, but then also extend their responsibilities into what the profit and loss managers are most worried about relative to risk, and create really tight relationships with those leaders, whether it's the leader of the company or leaders of various divisions. So I put a whole lot of things on the table there, but I guess the first piece would be just understand the environment you're in. And then the company you're in also has a unique way of looking at risk. And so doing an assessment of the business, interfacing with the profit and loss leaders, getting time on their calendars, and then building, starting to build a program. And we can delve into how successful leaders build a program, and then, interface with those leaders to then get a larger budget, a larger team, and more prominence within the corporation.
It sounds a lot like when you're making that transition from government to the corporate world, it's a different language.
There is, and it's just different. Both are both are important roles, especially for our audience. Our leaders, they're government, they're public safety. There's a really important mandate there. In the corporate market, it's similar, but then there's also other factors like P&L managers are going to be concerned about financial loss, right? Corporations, when I say P&L, I mean profit and loss, right? So how do you help those leaders maximize profit and minimize loss? And clearly, many companies put a huge import on human capital, and that does impact P&L. So I think we'd all care about safety of individuals. But at the end of the day, these leaders, the P&L leaders, are literally measured on how much profit they generated versus the last year or so. And that's acutely on their mind. And so how we can interface with those people to understand what are the drivers of profit and what are drivers of losses, and then also the perception of our role and how we can support that, I think is super critical. And so personal relationships are important across government and private sector, but here it's that continual interfacing of here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, is this supporting what you want, and is it successful? And so we can measuring that is important too, and we can chat about that.
I think that's the hardest thing for anyone in a security function is you're trying to, like I said earlier, not make anything happen. So where is the ROI? How do I demonstrate that to an executive or to a CFO, like you said, worrying about the profit and loss? Yeah, that might be a good place to go explore next. How do we start measuring these kind of components?
Yeah, that's great. So first takeaway is, our customers, in corporate security, it's a cost center. It's not, it's a staff function and a cost center. So these groups are literally responsible for supporting the other groups. Okay. In developing a program that quantifies and becomes part of the operation. Let me give you an example. Like when COVID hit, our customers used the Topo system to make sense of COVID data, and that data was critical to the operations. Some customers used it to determine whether they would send in their service technicians into certain regions or not, based on infection rates. Another customer used it to publish all COVID data at a local level and make our maps available to every employee, just so they can know what's happening in their local community in terms of infection rates, ICU rates, while they were working from home. And this was really important to the operational team, and especially like the CEO and even the board. Like, what are we doing as a company to responsibly keep our operation going? What are the choices we're making? And I think successful corporate security teams became the team, at least in our customer base, that managed that response effort and became the group presenting the data and making recommendations. And that was huge. That really allowed our customers to become more integral to the operation, way more visible in the organization. And so this is just based on like one event and one ongoing event, which is a pandemic. But beyond that, I think when we think about how to become, more successful, it's really measuring and managing upward, and then also using data and technology to manage downward. So how do I do more with less using technology? Historically, I think corporate security teams have just hired more people, and people are incredibly important. You have to have the right people, the right processes, and the right technology. But with the right technology, along with the right data from partners like LifeRaft, a lot of efficiencies can be created. And so what we found is the most efficient groups have moderate headcount. They have headcount, but they don't have like hundreds of people in corporate security. They have smaller groups using the right data and the right technology to visualize and analyze threats or environments, and then going to their leadership and saying, here's what happened. Here are the programs we've implemented. Here's the quantifiable result. And here's how it compared to the last period. And I like to use this as the comparison, the cybersecurity team. So in the quarterly business review, a cybersecurity leader would sit down with his or her boss and go through a set of metrics. And these are consistent metrics that are prevalent across cybersecurity, which is how many denial of service attacks did I have last quarter? What was my uptime last quarter versus last quarter? These metrics are gathered and compared to the last period, and it leads to a conversation. So the conversation might be as follows. Okay, our uptime was 99.2%, and that's a 22% improvement over last quarter. And then the CEO says, I'd love to see us get above 99.5%, because I'm hearing from my peers that is like best practices. And frankly, we should be at 100%, but can't we get above 99.5%? And then the cybersecurity, the CISO says, the CISO says, well, funny you should ask that. I have a program and a way, an investment that we can make to get our uptime, higher. And here's what it requires. And here's the budget approval that I would look to get. Okay. So then let's say the funding happens, then the CISO is now on the hook to get that uptime up above 99.5%. And hopefully he or she will. And then this feedback loop and this program gets built up. Those similar metrics on what is success in corporate security are evolving and emerging. And I think successful groups are able to first handle the data to understand how to actually compile the data efficiently. So there's not a lot of manual report tabulation. And certainly systems like Topo can generate those analytics and those benchmarks. But you have to establish those benchmarks with your leadership on like what is success. And then consistently in the QBR, go into those meetings to show your numbers basically and how they compare to last quarter, in addition to working with those P&L leaders to help them, like I said, maximize profit and minimize loss. And maybe those are part of your QBRs too. Like an example would be, maybe like if your purview is in supply chain, how did we keep our theft or our leakage down below a certain percentage point using corporate security programs, and you can quantify the loss and develop an ROI. So these are just some examples. But again, every company looks at risk differently. It's the responsibility of the chief security officer and the leaders to develop metrics and criteria and expectation setting, with their leadership, and then measure it on an ongoing basis so they can manage it.
I had a lot of notes from that answer there, because I think we could take this conversation in so many different ways from this point. I guess one of the things that kind of I clued into right away, because I've struggled with this issue in my own role, is trying to quantify things. So you had a great example there where in the cybersecurity unit can kind of quantify their business uptime and downtime, and you can articulate that with how much would downtime cost. So it's fairly easy to come up with the ROI in that case. How would I do that in different physical security environments?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it depends on the risk, footprint of, the company, what kind of business they're in. And but I mean, there's some good examples here. Like, I think you could, first of all, how is my team performing in their responsibility to respond to a crisis. So the first basic example, which is universal, is how quickly did my team acknowledge a threat emerging from a source like LifeRaft, to how quickly they sent a notification out to the impacted operation and team. Okay, so typically these things, when they linger or they get missed, the situation gets worse. And then the organization in general is more reactive as opposed to proactive. And so that time to response, can be measured. And frankly, it can save lives. I remember years ago, there was a bombing. This is an extreme example. There was a bombing in Brussels at the airport, and it had emerged on social media that this had happened. And successful corporate security groups were on top of it immediately. They had the feeds, the social media feeds from groups like LifeRaft to know that this happened. And they quickly acknowledged it and got the word out. And I think there was a Fortune 10 company that had a major office right near a major subway stop in Brussels. Okay. And, sadly, there was a second bomb that went off about 45 minutes to an hour after the first bomb at the airport. But this company, this was a major commuting hub down the street from their office, major subway or train or subway hub. They had notified their employees, stand down. There's an act of terror happening in Brussels. We don't know what's happening yet. So their employees didn't commute. Now, we won't ever really know, did those people, and the bomb did blow off in that subway station and lots of people died. So, what is the value of like a loss of life? Hard to quantify here. There's different numbers on it, but if at least we can say, and we can set the expectation that response time has a definite barometer of, could save a life. It could help operations keep running smoothly. And that can be measured on a case by case basis. But overall, just that more rapid response is definitely something that can be measured and definitely has an impact. So that's a basic example that's like universal.
Right. Well, it comes down to a lot of times to just really having a good sense of the particular business that you're operating in. Like when I started at LifeRaft, there was a great example from someone working with retailers, and they realized, well, if they stop robberies, every time there's a robbery, that increases the turnover rate at all the local stores by 20%, 30%, or whatever. And then that has that cost to the business. So being able to really articulate these different metrics in a way that's translatable to the CFO or the CEO.
Yes. And that's a great thing. And there's some companies, deal with sensitive items, whether it's intellectual property or, the case of like pharmaceuticals or high value things, or all these things have an impact. But again, each company is unique, identifying what those things are. And I would recommend, if you're new in a position at a company, or you want to reinvent yourself at a company, read the 10Ks, read the 10Qs, sit down with your line managers, talk about these things, the problems that are on their mind. And you brought up a great point. Like, it's not an obvious thing here that there'd be, it makes sense, but that people would leave if there's armed robbery. People would think there's unsafe. And in today's world, I think there's a lot of fear among employees now, and just the world in general with this COVID pandemic. People are concerned about their health and safety. Yeah. And line managers are the ones that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. There's disruptions in the supply chain, right? Major disruptions in the supply chain, whether it's our ports, in North America, or just manufacturing in general. So these things are, I guess the great news for our customers is for the corporate security leaders is there's a lot of job security here, because the number and the amounts of threats are to an operation continue to increase, right? And at the same time, I think the responsibility of our leaders is growing. I think there's a growing expectation. So let me give you an example, a growing expectation of what these groups should do with their limited staff and their limited budget. And I think there's a huge argument to dramatically increase those budgets. I think right now I read somewhere that like the CISO's budget is 5 to 6 times that of a chief security officer. I think that gap, will close. And let me give you an example. People are working from home and will continue to work from home. And some companies have announced that, through this year, even part of next year, all employees can work at home. So what's our responsibility as a company to keep those people safe while they're working from home? Do we just say, well, it's our corporate policy that you're working from home? Is that, do we have any responsibility like to keep you safe at your home, to make sure that your equipment, your corporate equipment is safe, you're safe? Like what responsibilities do we have? What is our duty of care? So these things are really evolving. There's moral questions, there's ethical questions, there's a bunch of different questions that pop up, but I think it starts with conversations with your leaders about the shifting landscape and what the mission of the group should be. Once that is sort of defined, and you can come with recommendations on what we think we should do as a company. So for example, one of our leading customers at Topo, it's a blockchain company. They said to us, the cryptocurrency company, they said, look, our employees are working from home. We're thinking about providing them a safety and security stipend to put in a home security system, to do other things. They can use it how they see fit because we want them to be safe. Okay, well, it makes sense, right? That's a very progressive view. And that industry, human capital, is like extremely important. So again, these are just these best practices and norms that aren't as fully established. That's I think in like the cyber world, these things are more established. It's a more mature industry. It's been around for longer. And you can see why CEOs have been fired for data breaches and privacy breaches, right? Many times, right? There's many examples. We haven't really seen that as much on the physical security side when a major event happens and maybe the corporate team maybe maybe there's a thought that they could have done better, but we're not always seeing, I don't think we're seeing as much like leaders losing their jobs. I think that might change. I think our leaders are being forced to anticipate these major things and preparing for them and mitigating them. And if they don't, I think there could be like repercussions. And I think, we'll see what happens post-COVID as an assessment on like what happened and were the right decisions being made and was there a lapse in judgment? But again, this is all evolving. I really just think it's an exciting time to be in this, this world. But certainly you have to have the right people, processes, and technology, and be prepared.
How do you go about assessing an organization's risk tolerance when you come in? So like you could have, you might assess an asset and say, well, this is a $50,000 asset that needs a lot of things. And then someone else the people in the organization might not value it the same way. How do you have those types of conversations?
Okay. Well, I always recommend, starting small, putting the full gamut of the conversation on the table. So talking with those P&L leaders, whether it's the president of a subsidiary or division, or worldwide operations versus domestic operations. And if you can get the CEO's time, that's great. So having a discussion, just a general discussion on the things that are on their mind and asking them to like prioritize and, what, in terms of risk, like what are the biggest things on their mind? And you brought up one point, which is like, hey, when there's an event, then people quit. And when they quit, that is a huge problem. Okay, how do we avoid that event? With another leader, it might be, geez, I'm having a lot of theft. Or another leader might be my supply chain, my drivers that are driving my trucks. Every now and again, they go off route and shipments disappear. Well, you have to just do these interviews, with them to figure out what is like almost like a risk assessment, but you're doing it in an interpersonal level, building relationships, and you digest all of that. And then you say, okay, there's things I want to do as a leader in the first 12 months, given the constraints, given the budget constraints, given maybe the hiring constraints, or just process development. And so, but then there's things for year 2, year 3, and year 4. And then it comes down to priorities. And frankly, you recommend, like, you got to cover the bases with the basic program. But what is the low hanging fruit? And then you put together this program, you get funding for it. And then you go to those P&L leaders and you sit down and you say, look, we met 3 months ago, 6 months ago. You gave me this full list of things that are on your mind. Let me just read them off to you again as a refresher. And you go through the 10 things and they say, is there anything else that has popped up in the last 6 months since we spoke? And the answer might be yes or no. And then you say, look, I am tackling items 1, 2, and 3 in the next 12 months. I've already started to tackle them. Here's what I'm doing. I'm going to continue to give you feedback on the impact that I'm making. I want you in the loop. I'm here to support you. You're my customer. Like, you are my customer, right? A lot of our corporate security leaders report up into real estate or finance, and that's their boss. But their customer, their customer is the P&L leaders. And I think that's something that's lost upon some of our, that's something that that is important point, that that personal relationship with the P&L leaders it is critical. So start small, build a program, and if you can, develop metrics that support that, where the current state versus the future state. So, if let's say in the supply chain piece, let's just say that the P&L leader says, you know what, every quarter we have trucks that go off route, and we actually have one that got stolen because it went off route, or the driver went AWOL or whatever, or like, basically, how do we measure, like, what is, like, somehow put together like a metric on what that is, and then implement a program, and then come back to that leader and tell him what you're doing, and then say, hey, you know what, we dropped that by 50%. We're able to, through our programs, we're able to mitigate that by 50%. And then from there, might even be able to quantify that in terms of what that means in terms of ROI. Those are the kinds of things that you want to, and then help you, and just like, sort of like, tell them what you're going to do, go do it, and then go tell them what you did, and keep that feedback loop going. So look, there are interpersonal relationships that are critical. A lot of times, unfortunately, in corporate America, the corporate market, perceptions are important too. But at the end of the day, quantitative metrics are really what matter. You have to be able to measure the quantitative pieces.
Oh, I want to follow up with that. What are some of the challenges that you see with perceptions in the organization? I thought I was kind of cluing in on something interesting.
Yeah, I think there's the old sort of, there's the guy with the gun, guards and gates, and that
biceps.
Sort of drinking coffee, walks around the round, sits at the front door, and nothing ever happens. And it's just sort of like, yeah, we got to have them, but whatever, right? They're not as, they're there because we sort of have to have them, but they're whatever. So it's like, how do we hire those people for the lowest possible cost, and, maybe even minimize this, the staffing, the number and the staffing. I think the new mantra is, how do we get really great people that know how to buy really great technology, that know how to work with data, and are able to work under a process. And so it's not like ad hoc. It's more, there's people, processes, technology, and it's all rooted in sort of data. So I think our entire space is, in general, there's a huge demand for people who can work with data, who can work with technology. I think it's a great job path to go down for any young individual that's looking to be involved in like a dynamic career. So it's not just the perception of like so I think there's some perceptions so I think it's almost like our leaders have to reinvent themselves when they come into the corporate environment to become more entrepreneurial, to understand what they know and what they don't know. Frankly, many of them weren't trained in sort of technologies and how to buy software and how to buy data feeds in the government market. Well, they can hire those people. There are those, you hire a team of people. Those people are in really big demand, and then work with those people to develop metrics and develop those processes, and buy technology in a smart way. I think the old way is just throwing bodies at something, and I think that is that only makes the perception of an inefficient, bloated cost center even like worse, as opposed to a more leaner, agile team that's bringing in data, working with technology, and then really making an impact. And frankly, you almost have to advertise you do have to advertise the impact that you're making. No one's going to seek you out and pat you on the back everyone's so busy. So you have to be a little political here in terms of what your normal cadence would have been maybe in government, where it's like in the corporate market, it's like, hey, when I get a win, I need to share the win and share the cost savings and make myself more visible. Why do you have to do that? It's because everybody is fighting for budget. They're fighting for their programs, and you need money to hire the best people. You need money to hire, to purchase great technology, to buy great data feeds, to have really important, not vendor relationships, but, supplier partner relationships. So, and money is a critical factor. And so I think that's really we hope that we collectively, LifeRaft, Topo, others in the industry, can help make our chief security officer leaders and teams way more effective so that they can grow their budgets. They can get commensurate pay grades too, pay grade increases. That's what comes with this too. It's like, geez, you're making a huge impact. How do we make sure we retain and develop those people who are on your team, right? So everybody wins in this new mantra, in this new model. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have an environment though where risk mitigation is not a priority, and it's really viewed as a cost center, and maybe the leadership doesn't really want to invest any money into the business, and say and it's a really uphill battle. So I think that's the exception. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe that was like, maybe it was 50-50. I think that's the exception. I think the norm in large corporations, Fortune 5,000, is that a crisis like COVID, an act of terror, these are things that have a major impact on the company. People get hurt, operations get disrupted, and we as a company, we as a leadership team need to do a better job. So I believe it's top of mind with risk management committees on boards of directors. And I think you're going to see a whole new wave of people and a larger funding, emerge as a result of an increasing number of events.
Right. Well, Phil, that's really solid advice. But we're coming up to the top of the hour, which was all the time I promised to steal from you because I know you're a busy guy. What is the one big takeaway that you want to leave listeners with today?
I think for the corporate security leader, the chief security officer, I think you can't have too close of a relationship with the people that own the profit and loss. It's hard to get their time, but go see them. I know it's hard in the COVID world. Go see them face to face. Have a meal with them. Do it on an ongoing basis. They're your customer, even though your boss might not be that person. Okay, I think that's number one. For the corporate security team members, I think there's a really nice mix of technology vendors that are true partners, not just vendors. And a lot of great new technology, whether it's data from LifeRaft or platform technology from Topo. So the people that are in the trenches doing the work, you can do a lot more with less spend with newer technologies compared to some of these legacy programs. So dust off the whole technology purview and get close to your P&L leaders.
And just before we wrap up, I want to discuss our new partnership between LifeRaft and Topo.
Oh, it's great. Yes. So we're thrilled to announce that we have integrated various LifeRaft data feeds natively into Topo. You have to have a LifeRaft license and a Topo license, but the connection is seamless. It takes minutes to turn on to start porting your data into the Topo One maps and workflow and reporting and analytic modules that we have. And we're seeing that our customers love it. We're in a new world now where if you don't work with other vendors in the space, you're going to be left out. You have to work with other vendors and prove that your platform is easily interoperable with other systems. And so the monolithic purchase of just buying one platform that is where you can't bring in a new intelligence feed into a platform, or it's difficult, or there's large API fees, that is a thing of the past, becoming a thing of the past and not well received. So we love the posture of LifeRaft. Our customers absolutely love it. Yeah, we're happy to share. The LifeRaft team can share it with you. We can share it with you. We're here to find the future of intelligence within the corporation.
A 1 + 1 = 3 kind of situation, better together.
Oh, definitely. And, one other point there is best in class. We pride ourselves on a best in class visualization, workflow, analytics, and reporting process. And, LifeRaft clearly best in class on social media, deep and dark web monitoring, and other intelligence feed generation. So you have to have both, but letting the customers pick and choose and then seamlessly working together is really the future. Force feeding a customer on an inferior data feed or inferior map-based system is not being well received in today's market. I think it'll be a thing of the past in the future.
And Bill, if listeners want to learn more about you or your company, where can they check you out?
We are at www.topo.ai. Topo.ai, and our platform is called Topo1. And my email is phil.harris@topo.ai if you have specific questions on how to go about or how to think about any of the topics in today's discussion.
All right. Thanks again for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, listeners.
Again, that was Phil Harris, Chairman and CEO of Topo.ai. Thanks again for listening to another edition of the LifeRaft Security Conversation series. If you'd like any more info on how to use open source intelligence to enhance your physical security program, be sure to check out our blog at liferaftinc.com/resources. That's liferaftinc.com/resources. I hope you tune in next time.